And today, as we continue our series through James called Follow Me, man, that last song we just sang sometimes is one of those like really, really difficult songs for me to sing. Right? You ever find yourself in the middle of worship like singing a song and then going like, crap, I don't know if I really believe this. That's hard for me sometimes, right? Like singing, I don't want this world, I have everything I need in Jesus, is for sure the what I would like to be able to sing and believe that wholeheartedly of like, there is nothing in this world, right? Like I know cognitively in my head that there's nothing in this world that can satisfy me ultimately. How do I know that? Because I've tried. Right? Like I ran after sports, and that at a certain point, like you can win the championship, you can get the medals, you can get the awards, you can get the accolades. Like quite literally, my mom the other day, they were cleaning out their garage, and she's like, hey, do you want these plaques? Like we used to do this thing in high school called sports banquet, and we would dress up, and all the athletes from that year would come together, and I had like my plaques, whatever, from like the one MVP I got, the like probably a lot of the like most improved I got. Isn't that the worst award ever to receive? The most improved award basically says you used to suck and now you don't suck as much. Congratulations, here's a plaque, right? And then like I got one best all around my senior year, but she had this like stack of plaques and she's like, do you want to keep these? And I'm like, no, like what am I gonna do with those? Like put them up in my new house and go like, yes, my high school awards. Like everybody walks in and goes, we don't care. Right? Like even the most successful athletes get to the point where eventually they're not athletes anymore, and you just kind of go, well, that doesn't do it for me. Right? And if you chase after sports or money or intelligence or the right job or skating or surfing or whatever it may be, I think we come to the end of those things and kind of realize, when my head hits the pillow at the end of the day, like these things they don't quite cut it. And so do I want to be able to sing, I don't want this world, I have everything I need in Jesus? Yeah. But sometimes I have a tendency of taking really good things, like even God-given created things, and making them God things. Taking something that God has gifted me and making an ultimate thing. And so, man, I don't want this. Probably a more accurate version for me to sing would be, I kind of want this world, but I'd really like to be able to sing, I have everything I need in Jesus. Like, what if we put that up on the screen? You're like, that's a lot of words. It's a complicated worship song. But it might be a little more honest for me. Hey, if everything was stripped away in my life, absolutely everything. We look at a guy like Job in the Old Testament, everything stripped away. Would I be able to confidently stand before God and go, God, you give and you take away, I still choose to follow you? That's tough. I mean, no one ever said following Jesus is easy. Probably one of my favorite passages in all of Scripture is John chapter 6, where Jesus teaches this like really kind of crazy teaching on like eating his flesh and drinking his blood. Yes, it's as weird as it sounds. And you're like, huh? And a bunch of people leave. Like a bunch of, like the crowds of people just walk away. And they're like, that's it, I'm out. Right? Like the miracles were cool. Like when you fed us, that was really cool. Like you brought that dead girl back to life, super cool. But this is too hard. Like this is too difficult. And then Jesus looks at his disciples, his followers, right? In this series, we're talking about how do we follow Jesus? He says, what about you? Are you going to leave too? And Peter, in John chapter 6, at the end of John chapter 6, he goes, I don't quite get it. I don't fully understand, but no, I'm not leaving. Because you, Jesus, you have the words of eternal life. Peter understood. There was a part of him that wasn't just this physical body. It wasn't just the here and now. When Peter's head hit the pillow at night, he believed fundamentally there is more to this life than just right here, right now. So what do I do with that? He goes, Jesus, there's something about you. I don't know what, but I don't have all the answers, but I want to follow you. And in this series, that's what we want to do. We want to be honest followers of his. And just go, man, I want to be a learner. Right? That word follower, disciple, it means learner. And they go hand in hand.
So would we be people that lean in enough to go, okay, I don't have all the answers, I haven't figured it out, but this is a place where, man, if you want to chase after what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus, you're in the right spot. Would we learn together? James chapter 1, verses 19, 20, 21. I just want to tackle these 3 verses, and really just 2 of them mostly. Okay, it says this, my dear brothers and sisters. Hey, hear the tone as James writes. This is the half-brother of Jesus, who once upon a time didn't even believe that Jesus was God. Once upon a time, he fundamentally rejected God and just went, nope, I'm out. And then something happened. He had some sort of experience with Jesus that made him change his mind. To write James, a servant of the Lord. Right? He had this life transformation because he knew Jesus is the only thing that can fully satisfy and fulfill. And so he says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Right? His challenge is quite literally, write this down. Take notes on this because he knows that we as human beings, we tend to forget things. Right? I'm not a super detail-oriented list person, but the more that I forget things, the more it makes me go, maybe I should start writing these things down. Right? And some of you are all about lists, right? Like you make lists all the time, and then on the bottom of your list, you write, make a list, and then you check that off, and you're like, done, right? Because it makes you feel good. Others of us, right, we are not detail people, but if, taking notes, writing things down, whether it be practical life things, or even opening up God's word, it's helpful because we're forgetful. So he says, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. He gives us 3 kind of practical life hacks here for what does it mean to follow Jesus? How do we do this better? How do we produce the righteousness, the right standing with God that God desires from us? Okay? Today, I want to challenge you guys that listening equals love. Okay? Listening equals love. Now, love is probably one of the most misunderstood concepts in our day and age, our culture, our society, because we can stand up and say, I love you to a human being, and then we can love Taco Tuesday. And even when we love another human being, so often, I think what we mean instead of love is kind of this cathexis. It's kind of this overwhelming feeling of I have fallen in love. And we're just talking about this emotion, this drive that we have towards another human being. But what Scripture says is that God's the author of love. 1 John says that God is love, and this is love that it's demonstrated through the person of Jesus sacrificing on our behalf. So what it actually means to love is not this feeling at the core of me that I have to be with her at all times. That's actually not love. Right? Love in its core, in its basis, is not a feeling, it's a choice. And that choice, it's to choose that person, whoever is the object of your love, that person would actually be better off and closer to Jesus because of you. God bless you, my daughter. Love you, Harley. Okay? Then that love, that word, what it means is what it's saying is when I chose to stand up in front of my friends and family at our wedding and go, hey, Paige, I love you. That is me committing. Fundamentally, my choice is that the day that you meet Jesus, Paige, that you'd be better prepared for that day because of our relationship. So if at any point in your life, if you think I love her or I love him or I love this friend or I love fill in the blank, right? Your definition of that love should be, is that person better off in their life group? Are they closer to their life group because of me? Are they better off with their family? Are they closer to their family because of me? And are they better off in their relationship with Jesus? Do they know Jesus more because of me? A lot of times in 9th and 10th grade, that looks like giving them the time and the space to simply lean into something that's other than you. Right? The number one thing that I see when I see a high school couple, like any high school couple, whatever it may be, that like spends all their time together, and they're like, oh, we just like really for each other. It's codependency. It's not love. And at the end of the day, it probably looks a lot more like pulling you away from your relationship with Jesus than pushing you toward. Take it from somebody who's made that mistake before and who fights that battle on a daily basis of, I don't want to be codependent on Paige. I don't want to be defined by my relationship with Paige. I don't want to need to receive things from Paige, even in marriage. I want to be fully known and loved and accepted and lean on that identity with Jesus. And I want her to do the same thing. And then as we in each other's corner push each other closer to Jesus, we have this healthier and healthier and healthier marriage. But that's a choice. Right? Do I feel an emotional connection to Paige? Absolutely. Right? Was I excited to marry Paige? Absolutely. Was our first year of marriage super fun? Absolutely. But were there times that were insanely hard? You better believe it. Love is a choice. One of the biggest reasons that divorce is so prevalent in our society and in our culture is when we get married, it's because we really, at the deep down, we just feel like this is our person. And then when we don't feel it anymore, well, I just kind of fell out of love. Friends, that's not a thing. You don't fall out of love because love is not an emotion, it's a choice. So as we choose to listen more, my challenge for us today is that we are going to then therefore love more. John 13:35, Jesus looks at his disciples, his followers, those that are trying to love and live like he loved and lived. He says this, friends, you will be known. You'll be marked by the love that you have for one another. You'll be known as my disciples. You'll be known as my followers by the love that you have for one another. Okay? When you guys are in your high schools, like if you look around and you see like an e-boy, how do you know he's an e-boy? Oh my gosh, did you just say e-boy? Yeah, I did. Hey, how do you know he's an e-boy? He's got like striped long sleeve shirt underneath like a t-shirt, okay? Maybe his fingernails are painted, right? Charlie Powers just painted his fingernails and it made me scratch my head a little bit. I was like, Charlie, what are you doing? Okay. It's so he stops biting him? Okay. But it's kind of also because he likes it, right? Am I right? But it's probably a good choice. Like, I don't want to stop biting my fingernails. Love you, Charlie. If you watch this, you probably won't. But anyways, what about like a visco girl, right? If you look around and some girl's wearing like some long baggy shirt and she's got like the scrunchie and everything, and you're like, oh, visco girl, right? Like we can walk around in our high schools and we can point out like skater, visco girl, e-boy, Oceanside. Like Mikey, do you guys know Mikey? Mikey works for, he's a leader over for 11-12. He's got kind of like shoulder-length blonde hair. He showed up to the Jordan on Thursday night, and he quite literally looked homeless. Like, legitimately. But he pulled it off. Like, he looked so cool. And I'm like, how are you wearing these ripped like Dickies pants and this like old tattered like pearl snap shirt, and your hair is like down to here and hasn't been washed in a month, and like you have this overgrown beard? And I'm like, this is, if you live in Oceanside, this is the definition of cool. Like if you can walk out of your 1980s like bent up Ford like truck and walk across the street over to Captain's Helm and your pants are ripped and you look like you haven't showered in 3 months, like you are cool. Like we can look at these people and they're so easily known by how they dress, how they act, the people that they hang out with. And I think God knows this about us. And so in John 13, he goes, hey, do you want to know how you're going to be known as my follower? It's going to be by the way that you love one another. And so I think one of our singular missions in life should be to figure out, what does it mean to love? How do we accomplish this goal of being marked by our love? And this, don't get me wrong, like this we're not going to solve this entirely today. Like I'm not going to unpack everything that is love in one message. 11-12 right now is doing the coolest series called Love Is, and they're taking like 12 weeks to unpack 1 Corinthians 13 that says love is patient. Love is kind. Love, it keeps no record of wrongs. It is not easily angered. There's this whole passage that just lists off all these things. It's kind of this litmus test for what is love and what is not love. Today I want to challenge you that listening is such a big aspect of love. Like we say this all the time at North Coast, but we say relationship is the bridge in which truth travels over. Right? So if Josh, for example, you guys all know Josh Baker, the homie. Okay, Josh, if Hunter, kind of like mentor figure of yours, right? Like further down the road. If Hunter points out something in your life and goes, hey, I think you need to work on this, because of the relationship that you have with Hunter, that's going to go a lot differently than if just some like guy you just met like last week comes up to you and goes, Josh, they really think you need to work on these 5 things. If you're anything like me, the first thought in your head is like, who do you think you are? Like, I don't know you, right? But when we're known, when we're leaning into relationship, truth can travel over that bridge of being known so much easier than if somebody who just walks up to us out of the blue challenges us on something. This is why life groups are so stinking important. That if we show up to life groups consistently and we're known and we have relationships with those that are in our life groups, then truth can travel over. But if we're not known and we kind of treat it like a family reunion where every once in a while we show up, then in life groups, when it comes time to actually share and be vulnerable, there's no way I'm going to be vulnerable with you guys because I don't know you and I don't trust you. And so our highs become like, well, I went to the beach this week, and our lows are like, I have a math test. It's like, really? Is that what's going on in your life? Like, that's the deepest, like, darkest part of your heart is a math test? It's like, well, no, but there's not enough relationship here for truth to travel over. That's why we push life groups. That's why we push mentorship. It's so important. And so how do we do this? How do we be marked by love? James kind of gives us a little formula here. Hey, number one, we have to be quick to hear. We have to be quick to hear. Okay, and within being quick to hear, how do we do this? Okay, how do we be quick to hear? Okay, how do we love better by being quick to hear? Number one, we have to be a good question asker. A good question asker. Hey, a friend of mine challenged me this last spring with the difference between being interested and interesting. Hey, when we strive after being interesting, which I think a lot of us do, pretty typically, we try to be interesting. Now, you ever seen somebody on an Instagram story and they throw up the little like box that says like, say something? And then they just repost what everybody says? Like, we are desperate to be interesting. Right? We walk around and literally the reason TikTok, Snapchat, and Instagram stories exist is because we walk around doing interesting things and then we want to tell everybody, look, I'm interesting. Because we so deeply desire to be known and liked and loved that we will throw it out on social media like, please like me. Now, can these things be used positively? Absolutely. I genuinely believe that social media can be leveraged positively. But I also think it can be leveraged really, really negatively as we strive to be interesting people. Right? In the last 6 months, something that's become more obvious to me than ever is I feel most loved by people that are interested in me more than they're trying to be interesting. And they ask good questions. They lean in. They listen well. And they're genuinely interested in who I am. I think this is one of the keys to being loving and to be known by loved, is that we should be people that walk around more interested than we desire to be interesting. Hey, number 2, don't just wait for your turn to speak. Hey, you ever been in a scenario before where you're like either in like a small group of people or it's like a one-on-one conversation and like the second you stop talking, like the other person starts talking and you're like, whoa, too quick there. And we don't really feel listened to. If in the midst of us talking, you can almost like see the inner workings of their mind going and they just are frothing to talk. Like they can't wait for their turn to talk. One of the keys to listening well is not simply waiting for your turn to talk. This is tough for me. This is a challenge for me, especially when somebody asks me like a good question or leans in. The number one thing I want to do is I want to answer that question. And so my mind starts turning. I start thinking about, okay, how do I answer this? How do I answer it well? How do I do this? How do I, and I no longer am listening to them. because I've begun formulating my answer, or I've begun formulating how my story is going to be better than their story. Or you ever been around a one-upper? Hey, you know what I'm talking about? Where you're like, hey, I ran 3 miles the other day, and they're like, oh, cool, I ran 3.5. You're like, I'm going to leave, right? We can't be people that just wait for our turn to talk. How do we be people that are actually listening and hearing, okay? Number 3, the power of knowing. The power of knowing. This one's huge. This is something my dad has challenged me with and has pushed me on, and it has fundamentally changed the way I interact in relationship. Hey, the power of knowing simply says this. Hey, when you know something to be true, you don't necessarily have to share it. So if something you know up here to be true, it doesn't have to come out of your mouth. Hey, for example, right, we've all been probably on both sides of this scenario where we're telling a story and we share some sort of detail in that story, and then somebody like jumps in and corrects us on that detail, and we instantly feel small. Right? We're like, yeah, like we were out in Lake Mead and we were houseboating, and we jumped off this like 25-foot cliff, and somebody's like, oh, it was actually 23. And you're like, I don't want to share my story anymore, right? Like instantly we feel small. Or maybe you've been on the other side of that where you know some piece of truth and somebody's sharing a story and you like jump in and correct them. Right? We've all been made either to feel small or we've made somebody else feel small. The power of knowing says, man, I can know a detail or I can know about something and I don't have to share it. It doesn't have to come out of my mouth. Right? Like if you've been a Disneyland pass holder for 3 years and somebody shows up and they're like stoked about their one-time trip to Disneyland and they're like, I went to Disneyland, it was the best. You don't have to go like, oh, Disneyland, cool, yeah, like I had an annual pass for 3 years. And instantly that person's like, oh, okay, my Disneyland story sucks now in comparison to your 3-year pass holder. Hey, but how cool is it if we're able to celebrate somebody else's excitement and go like, you went to Disneyland one time? That's awesome. And the power of knowing says, I know that I'm a pass holder. I know that I know way more about Disneyland than you do, but I don't have to share it. There's this book called Soul Keeping. And a guy named John Ortberg writes about being mentored by this guy named Dallas Willard. He was a philosophy teacher at USC. And there's this moment that John Ortberg writes about of sitting in the back of Dallas Willard's class at USC. And Dallas was teaching on something, and this young gun, like 18, 19-year-old, confident as all get out, stands up, and at the end of Dallas's class, just like bull-faced challenges him on something. And goes like, he stands up and goes, how could you believe that this and this and this? And John Ortberg said it was like this fastball down the middle, just this ability for Dallas to crush this kid. You know what I'm talking about? You ever been in one of these scenarios where like somebody pipes up and you know that person's about to get a smackdown, like intellectually? Somebody pipes up and you're like, I can't wait for you to get crushed right now. Like, you're going to look like such an idiot. And it was this moment where Dallas could have just destroyed this guy. Like, Dallas Willard is one of the most intelligent human beings that has walked planet Earth. Like, he bought a house next to his house just to fill it up, like overflow of his books, because he couldn't fit his books in his house anymore. Like, who does that? And you know what Dallas did at the end of his class? Right? This young gun, 18, 19-year-old, stands up, pipes his mouth off, and Dallas just goes, hey, it's a good place for us to end class. Like, let me pray for you guys, and we're going to be done. Ends class, walks out, and John Ortberg was like, what? Missed opportunity. Like, you could have destroyed him right there. You could have poured all of your intellectual, like, Hadouken, like, that could have been the moment that this guy just got so shut down, but because you were right. And Dallas said, to be right is often the most difficult position to hold and still be loving. To be right and to be in the right is sometimes the most difficult position to have and still be loving. And he chooses not to. He chooses not to have the last word. He chooses not to prove that he's right. Because the power of knowing says, it's okay, I can know it, but I'm going to practice self-control here. I think there's a reason God gave us 2 ears that are naturally open and 1 tongue that is hedged behind lips and teeth. And yet so often we're people that are quick to spout off our mouths and really slow to listen. Number 1 says, how do we love? We have to be quick to hear. Okay, number 2 says we should be slow to speak. Slow to speak. And when we're quick to speak, I think we're often slow to love. When we're quick to speak, I think we're often slow to love. Hey, how many of you, do me a favor, by a show of hands, how many of you have once upon a time said something out loud that immediately you went, like, I wish I had a vacuum cleaner on my tongue because I should not have said that. Like, immediate regrets. If your hand's not up right now, like, you're a liar, okay? Or you're just lazy, okay? Like, you're like, raising my hand, too much work. Okay? We've all done that before. My favorite comedian ever, his name's Brian Regan. He said, like, the worst thing you can possibly do is ask a non-pregnant woman how far along she is. And he says he, like, walks up to this woman one time and went, like, oh, my gosh, like, what's that baby doing, you know? Like, and she was like, what baby? He was like, like, how do I take these words back? And he's like, the pandas down at the zoo. Like, I hear they're trying to have one. How are they? Like, you're just trying to make something up at that point as this woman goes, what are you talking about, right? My dad was a pastor for 5 ever, and he one time made this mistake. There was this woman that just had a buttload of kids. Like, she had like 7 at church, and she had been, pregnant off and on this whole time. My dad, associate pastor of this church, walks up and he goes, oh my gosh, like, when do you do? And she just looked at him and said, I'm not pregnant, I'm just fat. And he was like, I want to die. Like, at this point, I just want to curl up in a small hole and just die, right? Like, that's the worst moment ever when you have a, like, sleep-deprived mom who's just pissed off at you, okay? My family all grown up said, like, go to the little room. Like, if you see the movie Inside Out, you know that movie where there's like the little creatures inside that's like, I'm anger, that movie, the concept of that movie is brilliant, okay? But there's so many times where the natural response of what I want to say in a moment, where somebody like makes me angry or upsets me, like my first gut reaction response is usually not the best response. And so the little room was the little room that could, like, miniature Austin, like, inside my head. Like, you know that scene in SpongeBob where he's like all the SpongeBobs inside of his head are like, they're just like getting rid of all the files, you know what I'm talking about? Like, this is the little room where like little Austin pops up inside of his head and is like, you should call him an idiot too. And then like you go into the little room and go, maybe I shouldn't say that. And then that saves you this like multitude of things you should never have said. Like being slow to speak, like practicing this alone can make us more loving people. Right? When we're quick to speak, I think often we're slow to love. And number 3, lastly, is we should be slow to become angry. Slow to anger. Hey, anger, probably more than anything else, can so easily derail love. Anger can derail love. Hey, if you were like a regular attender of Fuel 910, Isaac. Cool, thanks. If you're like a regular attender of Fuel 910, and I invited you out to like my flag football game, and you guys were all there, you're like in the audience hanging out, and I just like lost my ever-loving mind. Like the call didn't go my way, and I like slammed my flags down on the ground, and I walked up to a referee, and I like cussed him out, and then I like stormed off the field. How many of you would be able to come to like the next Fuel 910, like Wednesday night and weekend, and like listen to me and not have the like slitty eyes of like, I saw you, like I was there, I knew that, like, right? Like we fundamentally have a hard time with people who like say one thing and then do the exact opposite thing. Anger is one of those things that, man, athletes in the room, if you want to have a witness on your campus and you want to be somebody that lives out Matthew 28, Great Commission, and then you lose your mind every time you play sports, you're chipping away at your platform. It's really difficult to follow Jesus and call others to follow Jesus if we aren't doing that well. right? Those of you that have little siblings, those of you that have older siblings, or your relationship with your parents, like you lose your mind all the time, and then you're like, no, like I want to keep going to fuel. Like, will you keep taking me to fuel? Like, if you are an incredibly angry person, and yet you want to keep following Jesus, like those things don't really go hand in hand. Hey, Jesus called us to not be people that are easily angered. And now you might be thinking to yourself, like if you're sitting in here and you're a Bible nerd like me and you're like, excuse me, well, didn't Jesus get angry? Okay, yes. Hey, Matthew chapter 21, John chapter 2, Jesus gets pissed. Right? There's this moment where he walks into the temple and it says he was literally like flipping tables. I don't know about you, I've been mad before. I ain't never flipped a table. Like, I've never walked in somewhere and been like, Hulk smash, like flip the table. Like, one day, I would love to do that because that just sounds like a lot of fun. Okay? Maybe we'll do like a house party where it's like a Jesus in the temple house party where we just set up a bunch of tables and you're like, who wants to flip a table? Okay? And all of you angry people can come and just really express your anger. We'll have like punching bags on one side and tables to flip on the other side. And like 7 people will show up, but they'll all be like... It'll be great, okay? But Jesus' anger is expressed on behalf of someone else. Most of our anger, in fact, I would say all of our anger is self-centered. I'm angry because I didn't get my way. I'm angry because you said something about me. I'm angry because it's about me and it's self-centered and I'm not getting what I want, when I want it, how I want it. Hey, Jesus' anger is explicitly on behalf of someone or something else. Are there things that are legitimate to be angry about? Absolutely. Hey, God hates that which hurts his children. Hey, God hates pride. God hates sin. God hates pornography. You know what Jesus was mad about in the temple? He was mad that he showed up and the Gentile court, which was supposed to be the place that non-Jewish people could come and worship, was being misused, misrepresented. So people were missing an opportunity to have a relationship with God because of the abuse of the temple. So yeah, Jesus was pissed. But it was on behalf of others. Now, there's something that I think we can really, really practice in this slowness to anger is actually the way that our minds work, okay? For all of you that were wondering, what the heck is that fat Africa looking thing on the side of the whiteboard? This is your brain, okay? Oh, it says brain. I left that from last service, okay? It does kind of look like a fat Africa though, am I right? Okay? Like this is South Africa. Okay, anyways. Or like some kind of sheep, okay? But this is the way your brain works. Have you ever been on like a dirt road? I'm chilling on a dirt road. No country fans out there? Okay. All right. So you're on a dirt road, and it's got the like tire grooves where like all the other people have driven on said dirt road, and it's like there are these grooves where if you drive anywhere else, it's like, and then you go back into the grooves, and you're like, okay, I'm chilling, right? You can even see it on the freeway. Like next time you're on the freeway, next time you're just look out and you can see where tires have driven over and over and over and over and over again. Your brain works the same way. We have malleable, shapeable brains. And the way that your brain works is the pathway to anger or to a natural response is actually much shorter than the pathway to your patient response, okay? So if this is, say there is a guy in 910. We'll just use this as an example because we've used it all weekend. There's a guy in 910 that just really irks me, like does something wrong, like maybe they insulted Paige or like, said something just like insanely disrespectful to me or to one of my leaders or to one of my girl leaders, something like that. And like instantly I feel this like rage welling up inside. The pathway that says, you should punch this 14-year-old in the face. You should express your anger physically is actually a much shorter distance, the way that your brain, the way that it's firing is such a much shorter distance than the pathway that says, no, Austin, you really love your job. you actually really love this student too. And like what you desire for them is their reconciliation and their repentance more than anything. And the way that you love them is to look back on your own 14-year-old self and realize how much of an idiot you were when you were 14, and you should love and be patient with this. All of that is happening in the meantime where my brain's going, punch, right? Hulk smash. Like, you should destroy this kid. You're much bigger than him. It's not like you might hurt your hand, but it's okay. Like, that's this.
The patient response takes much longer. So if you are somebody out there that struggles with anger and somebody's told you before, you should count to 10. I don't know why. Because it actually works. If we are people that are slow to anger, when we feel that gut reaction and gut response to do something, when we get smacked, we want to smack back. When somebody talks trash, we want to talk trash back. When your little sibling comes up to you and they're driving you bananas, and you're like, whoa. Right? This, if we keep feeding this part of our brains that is just gut reaction, gut reaction, gut reaction, you're creating the tire grooves on a dirt road and training your brain that says, hey, react, react, react. This is respond patiently. But we have to retrain our brains. We have to transform the way that we work to create new grooves. And so when the ball gets rolling on a situation that angers us or upsets us, is it going to fall into the short, very quick pathway that has the grooves, or is it going to take the long way around that says you should respond patiently? This is tough to do. But anger can derail love. And so for people that John 13:35 want to be marked by love, want to be known by love, then we can't be people that constantly give into react. Right? Romans chapter 12, verse 2 says, do not conform to the patterns of this world. Instead, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Isn't that cool? Right? Like thousands of years before we discovered the psychology behind like the way that our brains worked, the God of the universe, through the person of Paul, writes in Romans chapter 12, you can actually transform your mind. It's malleable. It's changeable. Don't conform. Be transformed. Renew your mind. Change the way you think. Change the way you act. Believe in God enough to be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. This actually changes the way your brain works. Right? God knows us infinitely well. The author and creator and designer of our minds goes, here's how your brain works. And then a couple thousand years later we go, here's how our brain works. And God's like, did you not read Romans 12? Like, I told you this. It's so cool that we have the ability to take the long way around, to be patient people that don't explode in anger. We can be slow to speak. We can be quick to hear. Why? Because we want to be marked by love. When we go onto our campuses, in our sports teams, in our families, what if the way that you interacted with your siblings, the way that you interacted with your parents, on your sports teams, what if it made people scratch their heads? And instead of exploding in anger, or being really quick to speak, what if we were slow to speak, quick to hear, and our fuse was infinitely long, and people started scratching their heads going, you seem kind of different. You're like, yeah, I'm imperfect, but I'm trying to follow this guy named Jesus. Because there's nothing that satisfies, there's nothing that fulfills. When my head hits the pillow at night, I knew that there was more to this life than just what I was trying, and Jesus changed everything about me, especially the way that I hear, speak, and I get angry, because I just want to be known by love. That can be us. As 9th and 10th graders, making a drastic difference wherever you go, on Monday, on Tuesday, on Thursdays, on Fridays, so that when we show up here on Wednesdays and weekends and we're reminded of God's truth, we're living these consistent lives. School, family, sports teams, bands, whatever. Wherever we go, we're walking out with this just definition of love. So when we're walking out, people go, oh, yeah, that's one of those Christians. They're patient. They listen really well. They love me unlike anybody's ever loved me. If we were marked by it.